on to this month's Scaling Up webinar presentation on UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. This is Brian Fainer, and I help support the Park Service's landscape conservation efforts. Today's presentation, again, is on biosphere reserves. We have two presenters who both work for the Park Service who will discuss it. Pat Mangan is a coordinator for UNESCO's Biosphere Reserve Program, and he's based within the Park Service NRSS program. As a coordinator, he's working with the State Department, UN, and other U.S. Biosphere reserves to strengthen the U.S. program, bring it into international compliance, and reconnect to the international network of biosphere reserves. He's joined by John Mack, who's currently the acting chief of resource stewardship at Rocky Mountain National Park. And John has had a long career with the Park Service, including stints at Yellowstone and Bandelier. And he's been at Rocky since 2008. So with that, and of course, I always encourage folks to visit and explore our Scaling Up Landscape Conservation Toolkit website, which everyone is looking at right now, whenever you have time. And so with that, I am going to pass the controls over to John and Pat.
Thank you, Brian. John and I are sitting here overlooking the mountains of Rocky Mountain National Park and its biosphere. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Pat Mangan. You will be talking soon with John Mack. This webinar is intended to give you an overview of the UNESCO Biosphere Program and what it looks like in the United States. Then we're going to focus on 3 U.S. biospheres, Rocky Mountain, Mammoth Cave, and Southern Appalachians. Southern Appalachian includes the Great Smokies. The U.S. Biosphere Program was selected for a session in Scaling Up because it supports landscape conservation and sustainability on an international scale, and does this through local community cooperation. The UNESCO program, also known as Man of the Biosphere, tackles one of sustainable development's greatest issues, the disconnect between people and nature. UNESCO has said, if these connections break, we put our collective quality of life at risk, and if we keep it strong, we will build a future that inspires us. The role of the Biosphere Program is to nurture these connections between people and nature. Here's how the program works. UNESCO oversees the program. It gives international recognition based on national government nominations. It sets the standards for participation and promotes the international cooperation through its world network of biospheres. Each of these biospheres is locally governed, and each of the sites retains its sovereign jurisdiction within their country. There are over 650 biospheres in 120 countries. 16 of them are transboundary sites. There are 47 in the United States, and they're managed by the Park Service, Forest Service, state governments, universities, the Nature Conservancy, all in cooperation with local advisory committees. The U.S. biospheres work most closely with Canada and Europe as part of the international network. 18 of the units in the United States include Park Service properties, preserves and parks, some monuments. They range from the Everglades to Big Thicket, from Isle Royal to Golden Gate. Now, here's where this could get tricky. I found that the simplest way to explain the program was a video that was done by the Netherlands Permanent Attaché to UNESCO. So we're going to try to switch now to this 6-minute video, which is a short and clever explanation of the program. John, take it away.
On the biosphere program. It's about the network of UNESCO Biosphere Reserves, 651 biosphere reserves in 120 countries. What is the difference between the UNESCO Biosphere Reserves and UNESCO World Heritage Sites? UNESCO World Heritage Sites are very special places, like the Galapagos Islands or Yosemite National Park in the United States. They're so special that the international community decided to preserve them. The idea was to protect them in such a way that they don't change. The MAP program, on the other hand, has a more open approach. It considers that nature is always surrounded by people. And people, they need nature to live. They also need nature to eat and to develop. And that is why UNESCO Biosphere Reserves always include people and their homes. The program also focuses on this, not on nature as such, like World Heritage, but on the interaction between nature and people. It's about the right balance between people and nature. And the right balance is not only about nature, it is also about people and identity and communities. And it's also about development and jobs. And what the MAP program tries to do is to connect these three, to connect people and nature and development. Now, how does it do that? There are 3 steps in this process. The first step is science. The program uses science to look at these forms of interaction between people and nature, to find recipes for people and nature to live together without harming each other. It is about finding techniques for people to use nature without using it up. And there are many recipes for that, of course, and they can be identified by scientists in these 651 biosphere reserves. And all these recipes then can be compiled in a big book like this that can inspire, and that takes us to the next step, politicians. Because as a matter of fact, politics are important in this program. It is overseen by a body of 34 governments. And these governments decide which biosphere reserves become UNESCO Biosphere Reserves. And when they come together to talk about the program, they can learn about these experiments and these recipes for a good interaction between people and nature. And then they can decide to apply them in their own country. The third element in this process is networks, because these biosphere reserves are connected in one global network. And the managers of these biosphere reserves are also connected because they build relationships. And that makes it easy for these techniques and recipes to travel to other biosphere reserves with the tips and the tricks and the do's and the don'ts that these people have already identified for these people. Now, what makes this program so powerful and popular? There are 2 main reasons for that. The first reason is that these biosphere reserves know very well how to involve people. A good example of that is the island Principe in West Africa. It's a biosphere reserve, and it had a big pollution problems, plastic bottles. So the biosphere started a campaign against these bottles. And the idea was very simple. For every 50 plastic bottles that were collected, the person received a metal bottle that could be reused. And it worked, because even the hotels stopped selling these plastic bottles to their clients, and instead they started selling these metal bottles that could be reused. And the people of Principe also got enthusiastic about it, because for them it was a way to participate and to help their community survive. And even the government was so impressed by the results that it is currently considering to change the law to free the island completely of these bottles by 2020. The second reason for which the MAP program is such a popular and powerful program is because it enables scientists and policymakers to communicate. Because biosphere reserves are very special laboratories. They are not closed laboratories in which scientists work secretly in their white lab coats. No, these are open territories in the real world that are administered by real governments. And that makes it very easy for these techniques and recipes to arrive all the way on the tables of decision makers, because these decision makers are already involved in these territories. I stop here because now you understand how the MAP program functions. If you want to talk about it to other people, just keep it simple and remember two things. First of all, that MAP biosphere reserves are not about nature conservation, but they're about the interaction between nature and people. And secondly, UNESCO World Heritage is what we need to preserve the past, and UNESCO Biosphere Reserves are what we need to preserve our future. Thank you very much.
Start. I just want to emphasize that the information that I'm going to present is the information that has been supplied to UNESCO by the applicant, and UNESCO holds no responsibility for any of the maps I'm going to display.
Okay, just a quick status check-in. Brian, are we still good?
Yep.
Okay.
And did you hear it?
Yep. Sound great.
All right. Good success.
Nice job.
Modified technology worked. Okay, so the thing has been handed off to me. My name's John Mack, the Acting Chief of Resource Stewardship here at Rocky Mountain National Park. I want to say good afternoon to most folks, and then good morning to anybody that is west of the Mountain Time Zone. What I was asked to do today is just kind of give a brief overview of the Rocky Mountain Biosphere Reserve. And I thought I'd start out by talking a little bit about the history. Rocky Mountain was designated a biosphere reserve along with 27 other areas back in 1976. And of those 27 areas, 12 of them were actually national parks that began the Biosphere Reserve Program for the United States. Now, every 10 years, the requirements were for biosphere reserves to submit periodic reviews, and most places, at least in the United States, including Rocky, did not do any of those periodic reviews. Back beginning in 2013 and then again in 2015, Dr. Ben Babowski, the superintendent at Wrangell St. Elias, he was our Chief of Resource Stewardship here in Rocky Mountain National Park. He actually did periodic reviews, and through that process, the MAB Council reviewed our submission and basically brought us back into the fold of the Biosphere Program. Again, just to reiterate, biosphere reserves are internationally recognized areas, and the three key concepts that were alluded to in that video is trying to find a sustainable balance between conservation of biological diversity, economic development, and then maintaining cultural values in and around the surrounding area. I think the other key thing to illustrate about what makes biosphere reserves work is they're truly voluntary associations, or if you will, partnerships among all kinds of different partners. And I think what's really can't be overemphasized enough is each of the partners, they don't give up their authority to manage their lands how they see fit. What brings people together is various issues of mutual interests. And I think another thing is that some of the basic foundational mutual interests that we look to in these biosphere reserves is to promote research, education, experimentation, and then a lot of times just the basic information exchanges all along, I guess, the overarching goal of trying to protect biodiversity and then get to those other two goals of economic development and cultural, preserving cultural heritage. Now, one of the ways that we in Rocky were able to make that transition to get brought back into the fold is back in 1995, the criteria for biosphere reserves changed. And on the left of your screen, you'll see the three criteria that biosphere reserves were supposed to accomplish. So there had to be core protected areas, buffer zones, and transition areas. And what we were able to do is translate those three areas into what we call protected areas, managed use areas, and partnerships and zones of partnerships and cooperation. So with that, I just wanted to kind of show you an overview map of how Rocky Mountain set up our biosphere reserve. So the key thing that I wanted to point out here is there's this dark green, three dark green areas within Rocky Mountain National Park. Those are identified and described as our core protected areas. The rest of Rocky Mountain National Park, of which 95% is designated wilderness, is considered the managed use area. Now, the other things I wanted to bring up are areas of cooperation and partnership. We emphasize two to the UNESCO MAB Council. So this light yellow zone that's very large, you can see it's quite large, is one that we have set up with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and it really has to do with our partnership with them on elk and vegetation management. The other area of cooperation and partnership is with the Roosevelt, Arapahoe, and Pawnee National Forest and Grassland, and that's those dark areas. Now, within those partnerships, you'll see that we have buffer zones also incorporated, and that's identified in several wilderness areas that surround the park. Some other interesting things that I wanted to point out is we have the Frasier Experimental Forest, which is, I guess that's a light orange in the southwest corner of our Biosphere Reserve, and the Niwot Ridge Biosphere Reserve, which is that yellow that you see here that is kind of almost directly south of Rocky Mountain National Park. So as you can see, we can have a biosphere reserve, and then within that, there's other already existing biosphere reserves. So maybe just to do a brief overview of one of our areas of partnership and cooperation has to do with elk management. So with all that other noise taken out, you can see that it's quite a large area where we look to landscape scale management of elk. And the three principles are brought up in this in terms of the very purpose of our management plan is to maintain and enhance the biological diversity within the park. Also, in that lower left portion, you can see that there's opportunities for economic development or the economy where a lot of visitors, particularly in the fall, come into Rocky Mountain National Park to observe the elk rut. It provides all kinds of economic opportunities for the surrounding towns and communities, both in the town of Grand Lake and also Estes Park, that takes care of the tourists that come to see the elk, and they have to eat, sleep, buy gas, go to restaurants, and those kinds of things. I think another area of partnership and cooperation has to do with potential opportunities that we could engage with in the future with the U.S. Forest Service. And those areas can include things like species conservation of rare limber pine across a large landscape scale kind of area. It can include wildland fire management, restoration of native species like greenback cutthroat trout, and then also, because habitat is important for elk across the landscape scale, we would partner with the Forest Service in our elk and vegetation management. Now, one of the things that we initially tried to look at for potential other opportunities where partnerships already exist has to do with our air quality issues and nitrogen deposition in Rocky Mountain National Park. And the reason I brought this to the forefront is partnerships can involve a lot of different partners that don't necessarily have biodiversity or ecological restoration objectives in mind. So you can see there's a whole lot of different agricultural entities that are currently involved with Rocky Mountain National Park, the EPA, and the state of Colorado in looking at a issue-driven thing like nitrogen deposition, which in another form is actually helping to preserve and protect our biological diversity within Rocky Mountain National Park. Now, the fact that air is all over the place, that was a little bit hard for the MAP program to wrap their minds around, and so they didn't accept that as necessarily a basis for re-upping our Biosphere Reserve, but we're still persisting, and I think we'll end up convincing them that this is yet another example of meeting those three criteria of biological diversity, economic development, and also talking to important cultural heritage issues like agriculture. So what's that leave us for other potential future opportunities that we in Rocky Mountain National Park and our Biosphere Reserve might use as a basis to come together for mutual, if you will, issues or interests of concern? And we just gave a couple of different examples to kind of show how you can have some that are right next door across park boundaries. So in that case, it would be working with our local towns on bear management issues and, let's say, proper food and waste storage. It can include things that are facing many parks and areas that threaten biological diversity in going after exotic plant management issues as they cross many different boundaries, and it would be good to have coordinated efforts to try and limit that. And then for us in Rocky Mountain National Park, there's also this visitor use management issue that truly it does have implications to those three major criteria that are associated with biological reserves. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Pat.
Thanks, John. We're going to move now to the Mammoth Cave Area Biosphere Reserve, which was designated a number of years after Rocky Mountain in 1990. 2 years after its designation in 1990, it created an advisory council that was made up of the National Park, the Nature Conservancy, Western Kentucky University, and a state organization that is multi-county called the Barren River Area Development District, along with local representation from environmental and economic development stakeholders. This was particularly significant for Mammoth Cave because through the ups and downs of the program since 1990, it's been a very active group and a force for development in South Central Kentucky. Like Rocky, it has three zones. The biosphere is composed of a core zone that's the national park, a managed use area that controls groundwater protection, and a zone of cooperation where the environmental protection and economic development are carefully weighed. Here are a couple of things that the Biosphere's accomplishment has accomplished through its advisory council. It created the Cave Land Environmental Authority in the early 1990s. Prior to a regional sewer system in the area, domestic and industrial wastewater drained directly into the karst geology, including affecting water quality in the national park. The Green River Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program was created through agreements with the Biosphere, the Department of Agriculture, and local landowners to convert farmland into native habitats to preserve surface and groundwater. In 2005, the Biosphere backed legislation that created a policy for transportation that requires highways built in karst areas of Kentucky to protect groundwater quality in sensitive ecosystem, cave ecosystems. The regional economic development strategy for all of South Central Kentucky includes protection and sustainable issues that were proposed by and accepted by the area that were proposed by Mammoth Cave Biosphere. I want to talk a little about the economic benefits of being a biosphere. Tourism is Kentucky's third largest industry, and Mammoth Cave and the surrounding area have attributed their increase in vegetation to their status both as a World Heritage Site and a UNESCO Biosphere. Now for the third and last biosphere, the Southern Appalachians. The Southern Appalachian Man of the Biosphere Cooperative is a collaborative group of land management agencies that work together to promote communication on key issues that are important to the Southern Appalachian region with a focus on sustainable development. You can see it's a large area running almost to Maryland down into Georgia. And it's composed of units like the Coweta Hydrologic Laboratory run by the Forest Service, Grandfather Mountain and Mount Mitchell State Parks of North Carolina, the Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and the Oak Ridge National Environmental Research Park run by the Department of Energy. All of these have other partnerships which include tribes, state governments, other federal agencies that work in consort with these local advisory groups. They include the Cherokee Nation, the states of Tennessee and Georgia, Tennessee Valley Authority, and a number of other federal groups. Here are some of the things that the Southern Appalachian Biosphere has accomplished. Their decisions and their priorities are done by an interagency executive council, and they have decided that things like saving our hemlocks, the Southern Appalachian Spruce Restoration Initiative, funding community-led monitoring of water quality, invasive species, and forest health have been a priority. Funding conferences on the social and ecological issues of the area, and doing sustainable tourism studies throughout the area, including West Virginia, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Tennessee. They've also joined in a collaboration for biospheres with a nonprofit called Discover Life in America that leads all taxa biodiversity initiatives. One of the key projects that I think really highlights their large landscape focus is what's called their Vitality Index. It's a data compilation that predicts, directs, and implements sustainable development options, including public health, cultural heritage preservation, economic development, and environmental protection. It was devised by the Biosphere and is being implemented by the universities, the public and private sector partners of the Biosphere. In closing, I wanted to mention one more project that that highlights the connection between people and nature. And it's the work that the Biosphere does with the Cherokee Nation. It's working closely with them on rules and regulations for plant gathering, not only within the park, but also in the surrounding area. And it's provided support to the school system of the Cherokee to return traditional foods to the school lunch program. And it does protection and cultivation of plants that have a traditional and medical value to the Cherokee. Before we get to questions, I want to leave one last message, which is if you're going to do this, start with local partnerships before you launch into something large, because these local partnerships are the foundation for large landscape initiatives. And with that, we'll take questions. And Brian, it's back to you.
Great. Thanks, guys. So I'm going to begin unmuting everyone. So there's two options for asking your questions, and that is raising them with your voice, or you can enter them into the questions tab on your computer. So with that, does anyone have any questions? Actually, I'll start us off, Pat and John. So how, for maybe John, this is for you, for Rocky, you know, have some of the communities surrounding the park that are included within the Biosphere Reserve, have some of them been a little bit more hesitant, you know, to support, you know, these broader sustainability efforts because it's, you know, a UNESCO, United Nations designation?
You know, that's a really good question, and I would have to say, at least from my experience when I've lived here, that's never been the issue. I think part of the history of the Biosphere program, you know, it was a big thing back in the 1970s and maybe early 1980s, but I think it's you know, I guess stature kind of decreased and it wasn't really an issue. And really what it came down to is it was focusing on those partnerships of mutual interest. So we didn't use vegetation management plan. We didn't bring up that we were a biosphere reserve in order to implement.
John, real quick, folks, I'm unmuting everyone. So if for someone's typing, if you can put yourself on mute, that would be great because we can hear you typing. All right, sorry, John, go ahead.
So the bottom line is we really came together based on the issue at hand, and that was elk and vegetation management, and the principles of what we were trying to do is restore that and increase biological diversity while still providing for elk within the park and those other economic and visitor needs for seeing elk in the park.
All right. Here's a question. Couldn't everything that was described be done without a designation? Is it worth the hassle? That's a good question from Alan Raggins.
Glad to answer that one. Yes, it could be done without the designation, but you don't get the cachet of being internationally recognized, nor do you get the access to this international network of other biosphere reserves around the world. I found it particularly useful to be talking with the Canadians because they've got some innovative ideas on stuff that hasn't been done in the Park Service or in the United States.
All right, again, for those of you who haven't done so already, if you can put yourself on mute, that would be great, because I've unmuted everyone so you can ask questions, but we can hear any background noise. So here's another question that was entered in as text. The information on the NPS website directs the visitor to the 2001 issue of Park Science for a list of NPS units and associated biosphere reserves. Is there anywhere to find more recent information on the current list?
Your timing is impeccable. The U.S. just submitted, last September there was a deadline for these compliance reports. And we've been waiting since then for a response from UNESCO of how those were received. And it just came out today. So those biospheres that submitted and meet the criteria are getting letters. Those that need some more work are also going to be getting letters sent from the State Department. So that's the most current information. That's all going to be combined with a website that we're reinitiating. It's going to be part of the World Heritage website. We expect to have that up within the next month.
Great.
And Brian, I wanted to go a little farther into that question was, is it worth it? Between the question and now, I went to look at how many of the biospheres are insistent on being and staying in the program. And their comments are that it provides a sense of local pride, it's contributed to their economic development, and they see it as really valuable. So it sounds like it's worth it for those that are currently in the program.
And Pat, on that note, what's the ballpark in terms of the number of parks that are biosphere reserves right now?
Right now, it's prior to me reading this. This recent message, it was 18 parks that were either the lead for or part of a biosphere.
And I'm assuming every region had a park in their biosphere reserve in their region.
It comes down to that, yes.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Does anyone want to ask one? Vocalize their question? Well, here's another one that I have. What's the process for a park or a community for becoming a biosphere reserve? Do they have to be nominated? Do they develop proposals? And what role then, if any, does the National Park Service have? And this is beginning from, assuming they're not already one.
Okay. It's both of what you said. It's both a nomination process and a, what was the other thing that you have to request to UNESCO through the State Department that you want to be one, but it's going to require quite a bit of background information and particularly local support. There hasn't been a new nomination in a number of years, so my most recent example would be a World Heritage Site. The Alamo just got its World Heritage nomination, and it took a number of years and required support from the city of San Antonio, from the state of Texas, all suggesting that it was worth the designation. So it can be done. We'll be looking at new designations in about a year's time. So let me know if you're interested, and we could get started on that.
So you guys are going to be working on potential new candidate parks for joining the program.
Correct, and it'll be candidate units because they may not be. The national park may not be the lead. One of my examples is Champlain Adirondacks, which is a large area in upstate New York and Vermont, where there are no Park Service lands, but it's the state and some other federal agencies that are taking the lead on that. They may, those kind of places may propose new designations.
All right, any other questions?
Do you know if the Champlain Valley Heritage Area is involved with that initiative, or the Hudson River Valley National Heritage Corridor?
That I saw a lot of similarities between the Heritage Program and the UNESCO program. You know, though the Heritage Program is national, UNESCO is international, a lot of their values are the same. I don't think they're talking to each other. I know that their land areas overlap, but I don't think that they know each other.
Okay, thank you. I'll talk with the Champaign, or sorry, why am I stuttering so much? The Champlain Valley folks, because they do work with EPA a lot and watershed groups, so they may be engaged with people who may not know that they're part of the heritage area because their last part of their name is partnership.
That's
so
great.
I'll touch base with them.
And feel free to contact me. I can give you the names of the folks that are the lead at the Champlain Adirondacks.
Thank you. This is Katie Durkin from the National Park Service Heritage Area Program.
Hey, Pat. Josh Hoynes, Death Valley National Park.
Hey, Josh.
Just a quick question. I heard you say just a minute ago that the list came in today and that those of us that did apply this past cycle to remain a unit, do we have to wait for the hard copy or will there be an email so we know sooner?
As soon as I can read this small print after this webinar, I'll call you, let you know where you stand. But you're going to get an official notice from, you know, it's going to get sifted from the from UNESCO, from Miriam's office to through Paul Mungai at the State Department to you. But I'll shortcut that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Guys, we got another question here. What are the reporting requirements for maintaining status as a MAB? Have MABs in the U.S. lost their recognition?
I'll start with the second one first. Yes, some are losing their recognition. And part of that is due to them being designated by their agency and not having adequate local support. Many of those were Forest Service experimental stations. And I may be premature in saying that, but it sure looks like they'll be losing it. And what's the reporting requirement? The base reporting requirement by UNESCO is these periodic reviews, these internal audits that are due every 10 years. There will be more casual reporting requirements by the U.S. National Committee, but those are currently being formulated.
And as a quick reference, Pat, you want to point?
Well, I just wanted to,
yeah.
John just passed me a note. He makes a good point. Some are withdrawing voluntarily.
Yeah, there's been some units that have reassessed and they've decided they didn't, you know, they didn't no longer want to be a biosphere reserve.
So Pat, MAB, Man and Biosphere Program, right? That's what the Biosphere Reserve falls under. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So that's kind of the broader UN program that administers the program, that Biosphere Reserves. All right, other questions? I have one, and I asked it, but I was on mute earlier, so that big pause earlier. That was me asking my question. So sorry. This is the earlier question made me think about the difference, really between the Biosphere Reserve Program and the National Heritage Area Program. And one of those big differences, it seems that, is that this Biosphere Reserve Program is, and being, designated in that process is kind of like an administrative action, right? It's going through the State Department, right? And then the State Department is going to the UN. Whereas, for a National Heritage Area, that's a congressional legislation and a law that the President would sign. Is that? But yet there's some overlap. But that, in principle, that's right.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
So if a park wanted to take action on their own, it seems that a Biosphere Reserve route might be, in some ways, easier than a National Heritage Area route, possibly.
Possibly, but using those World Heritage examples is that it took years for San Antonio Mission to be designated World Heritage, and I'm guessing it would be a similar lengthy grassroots building process to designate a biosphere under this new process.
Okay. Is Big Ben still in? Someone asked.
Yes.
All right. All right. Any other questions? Okay. So, well, with that, thanks, guys. I mean, that was great. And for those on the line, our next webinar is going to actually be on National Heritage Areas. Martha Raymond with the Park Service will be presenting on April 25 at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So look for that, because there's going to be a lot of, it seems that there is some, as I think you said, Pat, I mean, there's some similarities in terms of the collaboration that parks undertake with working with communities, etc. So I think if you're interested in this this presentation, you'll probably be interested in Martha's presentation next month. So with that, again, thank you, John and Pat.
And thanks, Brian. Thanks, Cass, for helping us put this together.
And thanks for everyone that attended.
Great. All right. Well, everyone have a great week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.